the story of America's founding is one of courage, conflict, and compromise. It's a tale of ordinary people who dreamed of extraordinary freedom, of colonies that dared to defy the mightiest empire on earth, and of a nation that was built on both noble ideals and deep contradictions. Today, we'll explore how the United States of America came into existence from the earliest colonies to the Revolution, to the birth of a new nation. The early colonies in the early 1600s, Europeans began crossing the Atlantic in search of opportunity. The English were not the first to arrive in North America, but they would leave the most lasting mark. In 1607, settlers established Jamestown, Virginia, the first permanent English colony. Life was harsh disease, famine, and conflicts with Native Americans nearly wiped them out. But tobacco farming gave the colony a lifeline, attracting more settlers and wealth. Just 13 years later, in 1620, another group of Englishmen and women, known as the Pilgrims, sailed on the Mayflower. They landed in Massachusetts, seeking religious freedom. These settlers created the Mayflower Compact, an agreement that planted early seeds of self-government in America. Over time, 13 distinct colonies developed along the Atlantic coast. From New England's small farms and town meetings, to the Middle colonies' trade hubs, to the Southern plantations powered by enslaved labor, the colonies were diverse. Yet, they all shared one thing: a growing sense of independence. Tensions with Britain by the mid-1700s, Britain and its American colonies were deeply connected through trade, culture, and government. But cracks began to show. The French and Indian War of the 1750s left Britain with massive debts. To recover money, the Crown imposed new taxes on the colonies: the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, and later the Townshend Acts. For many colonists, these taxes were unacceptable. They had no representatives in Parliament, and they rallied behind the cry of "no taxation without representation." Protests swept the colonies. Merchants boycotted British goods. Writers and pamphleteers spread revolutionary ideas. And in 1770, tensions boiled over in the Boston Massacre, when British soldiers fired into a crowd, killing 5 colonists. Then came the Boston Tea Party in 1773, in protest of the Tea Act. Colonists disguised as Native Americans dumped British tea into Boston Harbor. Britain responded harshly, closing the port and tightening control. What had once been political disagreements now edged closer to open rebellion. The road to revolution in 1774, colonial leaders met at the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. They demanded the restoration of their rights, but stopped short of declaring independence. But in April 1775, the first shots of the American Revolution rang out at Lexington and Concord. Nobody knew it then, but the War for Independence had begun. The following year, in 1776, the Second Continental Congress gathered. Voices for independence grew louder. On July 2nd, the delegates voted to break away from Britain. 2 days later, on July 4th, 1776, they approved the Declaration of Independence, drafted primarily by Thomas Jefferson. With soaring words, it declared that all men are created equal, and that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed. These ideals would inspire generations, even though they were not fully realized for all people at the time. The Revolutionary War. Declaring independence was one thing. Winning it was another. Britain was the world's strongest military power. The colonies had militias, limited supplies, and little training. But they had determination and leaders like George Washington, who was chosen as commander of the Continental Army. The war saw ups and downs. The Americans lost New York, but won a crucial victory at Saratoga in 1777. That win convinced France to join the war on America's side, tipping the balance. Winter at Valley Forge tested Washington's army, but training and resilience kept them alive. Over time, with French aid, American forces grew stronger. Finally, in 1781, at Yorktown, Virginia, Washington and his French allies surrounded the British army. General Cornwallis surrendered, effectively ending the war. 2 years later, the Treaty of Paris of 1783 formally recognized the independence of the United States. Building a new nation independence was won, but the question remained: how to govern this new country? At first, the United States operated under the Articles of Confederation. But the Articles gave too much power to the states and too little to the central government. The nation struggled with debt, trade disputes, and unrest. In 1787, delegates met in Philadelphia to fix the system. Instead, they created an entirely new framework: the U.S. Constitution. It established a strong federal government with 3 branches: executive, legislative, and judicial, balanced by checks and powers. After heated debates, the Constitution was ratified in 1789, and George Washington became the nation's first president. The Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, guaranteed freedoms such as speech, religion, and the press. The legacy of the founding of America, was a triumph of vision and persistence, but also a story of contradiction. The ideals of liberty and equality coexisted with slavery, displacement of native peoples, and exclusion of women from political life. Yet, the founding principles created a framework that future generations would use to push for a broader definition of freedom. From the abolition of slavery to the women's suffrage movement to the civil rights era, America's story has been one of striving to live up to those ideals first declared in 1776. Closing scene. Inspirational tone. The United States was not born overnight. It was forged in hardship, defended in battle, and shaped through debate. Its founders were not perfect, but their bold experiment in self-government lit a flame that still burns today.